Yo, people, welcome back to the YouTube channel. You already know what time it is. It's time for a special interview. I'm joined by Ben Jacobs from CBS. He's been covering this ownership situation so well and with due diligence. And listen, it has been almost a soap opera of a situation since it all started way back when in March. And to be honest, I'm finally happy to say that it's coming to a close. It seems like we are finally getting to the end of this saga, but we have to get through it and we need to discuss the ins and outs of it. You guys have been asking me questions, and there's really no better person to bring on than Ben to talk about this and discuss it in the detail that it requires. Ben, first of all, absolute pleasure to speak to you. How are you, first of all?
I'm good. Great to join you. And sorry that you can't see me visually, although some would say that that's a good thing. But I am heading back to Edinburgh from London. A little bit worse for wear because last night was the Football Writers Association Football of the Year dinner. So I met a lot of colleagues, many of whom had also been covering this Chelsea saga, had a good old night. And now I'm heading back towards Edinburgh. And it's going to be good to chat about Chelsea as you say, we head to the final few days, hopefully, or certainly weeks of what's been a very long and complicated process.
Fantastic. Well, brilliant to talk to you. And it's good to see Mo Salah picking up that award. Much deserved. I did give him my vote. So it must have been a brilliant night. Let's get straight into it because there's so much to discuss. Like I said, it is a bit of a soap opera. It's very much been dramatic and people have been, very unclear on what the situation really is and who's really favorite. There's been a lot of fear mongering and whatnot in the media, but you've covered this in such a calm way, and it's been much appreciated in the Chelsea fan base. There's not been no loopholes, it's not been confusing, it's been straight and narrow the whole way through. I want to start with obviously the favorite, the person that's made into exclusivity, the person who's basically looking like he's going to, win the bid, and he is trying to get it wrapped up. I believe this is the last day for exclusivity. Would I be correct in saying that?
Yeah, it was a 5-day period of exclusivity that ends today, Friday, for those of you maybe listening to this a little bit later, or again, because you need to keep up with how fast I speak and the level of detail. And the period of exclusivity could, in theory, be extended by a few days. It's not like a hard, locked-in number of days, because you may get a scenario, for example, where they almost get to a point where a purchase agreement can be signed on Friday, and then they need an extra day or two. And therefore, the Clearlake Boehly group is in a very strong position, because once you enter into exclusive talks, when you have a sale that needs to be done so fast, it's very difficult for Chelsea to turn to somebody else. So Boehly Clearlake have got a lot of leverage now to some extent complete the formal aspects of the sale and some of the box ticks as well on their own terms, as long as both parties get it done before May the 31st, when Chelsea's special license expires. Then everybody will be happy, and both Clearlake clearly and Chelsea are confident that that's exactly what will happen.
And I think what their main advantage would obviously be, first of all, that the fact that there is a time, there's a deadline on this in terms of May the 31st. Obviously, the Premier League, the government want this wrapped up, otherwise there could be those sanctions. I want to start with that because, like I said, that is their advantage. Of course, on top of that as well, every other group still in the process or still hanging around and waiting to see if this does fall through, kind of has connections to another club, whether that be Atalanta, Crystal Palace, or even Nice as well. So they do have that advantage of maybe being able to get this process done a lot faster, not having to sell shares, etc. But in terms of those sanctions that were reported, there was a lot of, it felt like fear mongering from my side of things as just a normal Chelsea fan. It felt like a lot of, over sensationalized reporting in terms of, Chelsea could be dumped out of the Premier League, out of the Champions League. Just how serious is the threat of those sanctions if Chelsea don't get this wrapped up in late May?
Well, I think a lot depends on the government. So Nadine Dorries, the culture secretary, has always said that Chelsea are on, quote, borrowed time. And the government have been quite bullish in making it clear that they've helped Chelsea stay in business. They've allowed Chelsea through the special license to meet all of their essential outgoings and effectively get comfortably until the end of this season. So if Chelsea cannot get a deal done in what the government believes should be a fire sale, so they're not prepared to allow Chelsea to do everything on their own terms, on their own timescale. They're not especially happy and haven't been throughout the process with one or two of the delays through Rain Group, because they feel like Chelsea are treating this like a traditional sale when actually the element
Oh, your audio just cut out there. Oh.
Am
Nope,
I
there we
back?
are. You're back, yeah.
There we go. Apologies for that.
No problem.
So, yeah, the government and Chelsea have always had a slight disagreement over effectively who has control over the timescale. And the government argue that they've got the control because they're the ones that have put a date on the special license. And obviously, Chelsea are trying to go through a formal process that is more structured through Rain Group. And that particular process sees the government out the loop and obviously has its own roadmap and timescale. And there has definitely been a friction between those two. So the government at times during the last few months have definitely lost patience. But it's important to stress at all times that the government, the Premier League, obviously Chelsea, Rain Group, and the prospective buyers, all of them want a sale. It's in nobody's interest for Chelsea not to have a license or to go out of business or to not be able to meet their essential outgoings. So when we talk about a special license expiring, the government are going to say there are severe consequences to that license expiring should it do so on May the 31st, because that puts pressure on to complete the sale as fast as possible. And in theory, those possibilities, if the license expire, include Chelsea not having a license to be able to enter the next Premier League season, there being consequences on Chelsea's involvement in European competition, and most importantly, all of the current perks of the special license not being in place will not allow Chelsea to meet their essential outgoings. So those threats are looming over. And, you know, in theory, the government would argue Chelsea could go out of business. But in practice, and I think this is the counterpoint that's really important to stress, the special license can at any point be extended, amended, relaxed, tightened, or entirely removed. So when the government talk about May the 31st being the deadline for the special license, if we got to June the 1st and a deal wasn't quite done, it's not an all or nothing. It's not the license is gone, it's irredeemable, it can't be reinstated, it can't be changed. It's exactly the opposite of that. It's entirely in the government's control. So the scaremongering comes from the fact that in the earlier part of the sale through to about now, before a sale has been particularly close and when there's been multiple suitors, the government have used the theoretical possibility of these different scenarios that could, in a worst case scenario, see Chelsea go bust as leverage to try and complete the sale as quick as possible. And now we're down a home stretch where the Boehly Clearlake group will, I believe, take over and are very close. If for any reason things like the Premier League owners and directors test, the government license, or ultimately other box ticks like the transfer of funds take a few extra days beyond May the 31st, then I think you'll see the government change their tune and be a lot more flexible. So it is important that the aim is to get everything wrapped up 100% before May the 31st, because that means that Chelsea don't have to go to the government and ask for anything else and risk any consequences. But my understanding has always been that because the government obviously, much like Chelsea, want this sale to go through and smoothly, they're not over the sake of a few days or a few weeks going to put Chelsea in an untenable position where the club may not exist simply because they haven't quite got things done by May the 31st.
That's good to hear. It's good to hear because it did feel like a little bit of a doomsday situation, but it's good to have that cleared up. Obviously, Todd Boehly, you know, at this point, and obviously Mark Walter, the both of them coming from the LA Dodgers, and running operations on a day to day. A lot of Chelsea fans will have done their research at this point, know exactly why they've, you know, look to be chosen in terms of the strength that they're bringing to the side, the preparation, the planning, and all of those things that clearly puts them in this strong position. What today's deadline, what does that really mean for Todd in terms of the exclusivity? What needs to be done today, or is that another situation that can be quite flexible and extend in terms of potentially just signing on the dotted line and starting to push through that first deposit?
The 5-day period of exclusivity is effectively to sign a purchase agreement, and then with that purchase agreement, all of the other box ticks to 100% complete the sale can take place. So once you've got a purchase agreement, and usually you would use the period of exclusivity, which traditionally would be longer, to do your due diligence and get to this point. The due diligence was actually done prior to the period of exclusivity. So the back and forth in the last 5 days, which is why the period has been so short, has actually just been predominantly to resolve the handling of the debt. And now we know, as per Abramovich's statement, that that debt will be put into a frozen account. The parties effectively already had an agreement prior to entering the period of exclusivity. So there was very little to discuss beyond the debt, and to ensure that any aspects of due diligence that Boehly Clearlake couldn't do could be done at a later date. And by that, I mean that due to the sanctions against Abramovich and affiliated companies, there's not a great deal really, for example, that Boehly Clearlake can do in terms of due diligence now anyway. I know that some due diligence had been done in previous years, but now there's not much that they can really ask and see around Camberley, for example. So they are going to be inheriting a few aspects of Chelsea that have some question marks. Obviously, Camberley is Abramovich's company, where seemingly the money would be paid back if there were no sanctions against Roman Abramovich. And then Fordham has a relationship with Camberley as regards the loan. But if the Boehly Clearlake Group wanted to learn more about that, they don't get an entire 100% clear picture due to the sanctions against Abramovich. So there's a few things like that during this week that they have to just ask and work out what the plan will be after they walk through the door, because it won't be clear when they first get the keys to the football club. And the same is obviously with where the sale proceeds are going to go. What does victims of the war in Ukraine mean in terms of actually investing and helping them? Is any of it going to go to grassroots football? Is it going to be through a foundation? Is that foundation going to be founded through Abramovich and his people on behalf of Chelsea, but distant from Abramovich? Or is it going to be funneled through Chelsea? And can the new ownership group choose what that foundation is, who's going to run it, and who it will be affiliated to? So these are the kind of questions they ask in the period of exclusivity. But in essence, once the actual handling of the debt was cleared, both between Clearlake Boehly and Chelsea/Abramovich, and then between Chelsea and the government, everything else became very clear that a sale was close. So the period of exclusivity isn't really 5 days and a hard deadline. I think that the parties entered before the 5 days started with pretty much an agreement. And then the week that we've seen is just about kind of holding talks through Rain Group, Chelsea and Boehly Clearlake to make sure that any last aspects of negotiation are not going to prevent a deal. And providing they don't, then a purchase agreement will be signed. And as I said before, in theory, if the period of exclusivity expires, although technically a new suitor could then talk directly to Chelsea, Chelsea would in all likelihood just say, it doesn't matter, the period of exclusivity is expired, we're basically at a deal. So if they don't actually formally sign it until Saturday or Sunday or Monday, it won't make the blindest bit of difference. The parties have set themselves on a course now. A draft for the purchase agreement, I believe, was actually ready to be signed as early as Wednesday night or certainly Thursday morning. So it wouldn't at all surprise me at the time of speaking if everything's already processed beyond even that. And now the Premier League need to confirm in writing that Boehly Clearlake have passed the owners and directors test, and the government needs to license the sale, and then the transfer of funds needs to take place. And what would usually happen in a traditional takeover, and I believe it will be the same with this one, is first of all, Boehly Clearlake will transfer a non-refundable deposit, and that shows their commitment to proceed with the sale. And then the purchase agreement will be signed. And then after the Premier League confirm that the owners and directors test has been passed, which it will be, and the government license the sale, they will then make the balance transfer of funds. And at that point, they are the owners of Chelsea Football Club.
And to touch on that as well, with the directors and owners test, it was reported, or it sounded like potentially from rumours that the Premier League were doing unofficial checks on everyone to try and speed up the process. Is that true as well, or is that something that they've only really started once this period got to this point?
No, the Premier League have soft vetted all listed owners and directors, and also looked into what they call shadow directors as well. So a shadow director, for example, might be somebody affiliated to Clearlake Capital who is not directly involved in this consortium but could have influence. And we saw this with Newcastle United as well, where the government and Premier League believed that PIF, the Public Investment Fund, who are the majority owner of Newcastle United, were de facto controlled by the Saudi Arabian state, and therefore the Saudi Arabian state should be a shadow director. So what the Premier League have to do with Clearlake in particular, because they're more faceless comparative to, say, Todd Boehly or Hans-Jörg Weiss or Jonathan Goldstein, is just check that the makeup of the investors from the majority owner don't, for example, have any links to Russia, and that there's nobody else untoward that the Premier League are not comfortable with. So they did the vetting of the names, but one of the challenges for the Premier League is that until you get a final offer and a purchase agreement, they can't assess every aspect and they can't formally carry out the owners and directors test. So they may tell Chelsea, because it's Chelsea that put through the test on behalf of the prospective owners, they may tell Chelsea that the ownership group are going to clear, and absolutely they will pass. But the other aspect of the Premier League owners and directors test is that they have to assess things like 3-year business plans. And how can you pass a 3-year business plan if the groups haven't even got to a point where they have a finalised business plan? And how can you have a finalised business plan if you don't know at the point you're talking to the Premier League before it's official if your purchase of Chelsea Football Club, if your Boehly Clearlake, is debt-free or not debt-free? That obviously makes a big difference to the business plan. So even though they will have presented a lot of scenarios to the Premier League, and even though they would have kept in regular dialogue with the Premier League, it's only really been in the last few days that the Premier League can actually see the final business plans and the final ownership group as it will be when they walk through the door. And that's also reflective of the fact that Clearlake's ownership stake has been reduced slightly from about 66% to approximately 60%, as I understand it. And again, the Premier League need those final share splits, otherwise they can't formally clear it. So it will go to the Premier League, and the Premier League will clear it, as I've been told by Premier League sources, within a 7-day period. So that will probably be something like Friday next week. The government, if they only have to do one license to actually sign off the sale, that will allow them to also act pretty quickly. And again, they'll be able to green light the sale probably within a 7 to 10 day period, which means you're actually looking at the week before the 31st as to when Boehly Clearlake at the earliest would be confident of being at the football club in a controlling sense. I think they'll announce it, or it will be clear that they are the next owners of Chelsea before that, but they won't actually be able to do anything until all of these box ticks, including the transfer of funds, have been done. But it still gives them plenty of time. They've effectively got the best part of 3.5 weeks. And based on sources that I speak to, they'll only need about 2 weeks to actually get through the door. So there's even a little bit of leeway there if there are a few minor delays.
And this is why the Ricketts and Griffin bid fell through, is because of the share split up. And if this was to fall through in terms of Todd Boehly and the Clearlake consortium, now every single different group that now comes forward in terms of the next up, they have to go through the same process, and the government have to check them exactly with all these plans, like you're saying. So this is how the process could be extended way beyond potentially the deadline if Todd Boehly wasn't to get this completed. But from what it seems on the reporting, it seems that step by step they're following procedure, and there doesn't seem to be much likelihood of that happening. I want to get into the Clearlake and Vice part of this before we go through just a few of the other investors, and then move on to Abramovich's statement, which I want to get your opinion on. But Clearlake didn't really, from a fan point of view, from my point of view, they seem to come into this quite later on in terms of the whole package. In terms of Vice, it seemed like a American/Swiss consortium, as it started off to be. Vice was going to be the main investor, the person with the main sort of backing and money coming in. And Clearlake came out of they came a little bit later in terms of their percentage, 66, which obviously dropped off, like you said. Obviously, Clearlake, they are their own entity, and they're probably a lot of Chelsea fans' biggest concerns in terms of this bid, because of we're not sure how they're going to invest, how ambitious they are, how they see this in terms of, obviously they would like to obviously have their investment take profits maybe in 10 years time. They would like to see some sort of return. That's the way they operate as a business model. How do you assess this whole Clearlake situation translating into football? Because of course we saw comments come out from Ratcliffe on this, and how it's kind of absurd that this is happening in the Premier League. It wouldn't happen in the NBA, etc. So how do you see this Clearlake Boehly and even Vice kind of group, you know, in terms of investment for Chelsea's, because they put forward so much ambition. They want to, you know, do things with the stadium. They want to invest in the squad. Boehly sounds like as if he wants to win trophies. He sees success as a main way as to, you know, showing some sort of profit margin in the future is by being successful. And that's the way he sees things going. But how will his financial backing kind of align with that plan? Oh, audio maybe again. Can you hear me, Ben? There's audio. Oh, just cut out. 1 second. Let's see. Oh, yeah, not connected at the moment. I think it's a connection issue. Yeah, definitely a connection issue.
So that is
yeah, I hear you. I have you now.
Yeah, I just entered onto a train, so unfortunately, at this point, the reception may be a little bit more patchy. But I think the thing to bear in mind about Clearlake is that they were always fully involved from the start. And therefore, when Chelsea fans learnt about them, they were maybe a little bit more surprised and were worried because the whole face of the bid has been Boehly. And actually, Boehly never saw value in Chelsea Football Club as a majority owner, and Hans-Jörg Weiss the same, and that's why they partnered. And where they see the ability to use Chelsea to both the...
Oh, might have some connection issues now. I've got one. Oh, there we are.
I think I'm back. Sorry, yeah, the
we can hear you. All good.
Going to be poor. But yeah, the thing with Clearlake is Clearlake were always involved from the start. And not only were they always involved from the start, but they were always going to be the majority owner from the start. So there was no real negotiation over the share split. That was always going to see Clearlake as the majority owner. The only thing that's changed is they've lost a little bit of a percentage as slightly more investment has been put behind the bid. And the fact that Chelsea want their majority owner to stay until 2032 and Clearlake have committed to that changes the model a little bit, because usually you talk about a private equity firm and you would think they'd be short-termist and they'd be looking for a relatively immediate return, or certainly a medium-term return. But when they commit to staying at the football club until 2032, that obviously changes a little bit. And in addition to that, Bairdad, who is the Clearlake co-founder and is heavily involved in the bid, is a massive football fan and will also be quite vocal on a day-to-day basis, particularly around the football side of things and redefining how Chelsea sign players. I think Chelsea will move more towards a sort of transfer committee as per Liverpool, and I think that that's his kind of aim as well. And then in addition to that, he obviously wants to try and commercialise the brand, which is only going to be a good thing. So I think if you just look at it at Clearlake, then the first thing you think of is sort of faceless private equity, and it becomes worrying. And of course, rival bidders are going to say that because they've been in a race against them. So they're naturally going to point out any negativity behind another bid. But fundamentally, Clearlake's always been there from the start. And the fact that Boehly will have operational control should allow a nice balance between somebody day to day that knows how to turn a football club, or certainly a sports team, into a success and has a proven track record of that on the business side and the football side. And then on Clearlake's side, you've got a huge portfolio of potential investment and a very strong chance of globalizing the brand. So I personally don't think that there's a massive amount to worry about. I do think a broader conversation is very fair about should private equity firms be allowed to take over football clubs, but at the moment they are. So Clearlake are not doing anything wrong by being in part of this process. And I think the final thing to say is just that Chelsea had a lot of bidders and a lot of strong suitors, and Rain Group's come in for a lot of criticism in this process because people think that they've delayed a lot. But what they've actually done is they've weeded out those that weren't serious, and they've used their contact book to find very strong suitors. So the fact that a bid with Clearlake involved has beaten two other strong bids obviously shows you that they're serious about the long-term sustainability of Chelsea, or they wouldn't be there.
Yeah, 100%, and that's a really important point to make, and hopefully it calms down a few nerves for people listening. I want to get onto Abramovich's statement as well, because obviously that was released yesterday. It was a big thing to come out because of all the reports that had been in the previous days. So I do want to touch on that and especially get your thoughts on it, because it was such a detailed, detailed response from the spokesman. What was your initial reaction to obviously Abramovich, and was that really kind of, you know, what you expected from him in terms of response? Because when I was looking at this from afar, I personally wasn't worried as a Chelsea fan. I know a lot of Chelsea fans were worried, but I didn't see as to why Abramovich would go through this whole process. He is involved in maybe who is chosen reportedly. You can confirm maybe if that's close or to correct or not, but I don't understand why he would be involved in this process up until this point. Say what he said at the beginning in terms of not asking for the debt to be paid back, at least initially, before it maybe goes to court or goes through the legal procedures, and then change his mind when a deadline is coming. For me, that just didn't make any sense. So what did you make of Abramovich's statement? How close is it to the truth? Has there been any change or any pivot in from their side of things, or was this maybe just kind of over dramatized by parts of the media? Oh, he's gone again. Oh God. Okay, let me see. I think potentially he might have to come in and out because of connection. Just 1 second, people. Let's see. Let me mark this. Fine. Oh, there we are. There we are. There we are. Can you hear us? Yeah. Okay, perfect. Let's see.
Yeah, I can hear you. Our trainer's now moving, so perhaps we'll make this one the last question, because I think it will pop in and out quite regularly now.
Definitely. Definitely. So the final question basically was about Abramovich's statement. And what did you make of it? Obviously, Chelsea fans have maybe been a bit worried about the situation, considering what he said in his first stance with the money that he didn't want to take in from debt. Well, at least not until it got to a legal procedure, in terms of, you know, waiting until after the sale and going through, you know, certain channels for that. But obviously, that by the, you know, the media was reporting that there was a change of stance in that, and that was obviously causing quite a lot of chaos and worry. I personally was quite calm because I felt like that didn't really add up. It didn't really make any sense as to why he would go through the process, maybe, you know, picking and having a favorite bidder as he went through as well, and then suddenly for that to just kind of evaporate and go back to a situation where he is asking for his money back and prioritizing that. How did you react to that statement being put out?
The Abramovich statement, I think, just confirmed what we already knew, and that was that he'd said once that he didn't wish to get a repayment of the loan. He was always going to effectively try and write that off. And I think I'd learned quite early in the process that the loan was going to be difficult just to write off legally. It wasn't as simple as he wants to write off the loan so he can. The sanctions would prevent him doing so. And therefore, a solution for the debt had to be found. And that either had to be a deal with the UK government to convert it to equity, which was the original plan, or the new owner would have to take on the debt at book value. And they didn't then know where they would allocate those funds, or even if they would have to allocate those funds, or whether instead they would have to actually pay the full debt off via a third party, in this case the government, into a frozen account. And the beauty, I suppose, of this plan, even though we don't have much clarity yet as to exactly where it will go, but if the government receive the funds and put it into a frozen account, then if the sanctions are lifted on Roman Abramovich, because he's now said twice, including yesterday's statement, that he wants to forgive that debt, when he's in a legal position to do so, the funds in that frozen account will, one presumes, be returned to Chelsea Football Club, and they'll have the ability to invest that into the club infrastructure, because Abramovich has already said that he doesn't want that money back. I don't see a scenario where that money with government, I think.
Oh, just cutting out a bit. There we are. Yeah, we can hear you now.
So, yeah, I mean, the long and short of it is Abramovich has always said that he wants to write off the debt. He barely makes a statement. So the fact that he said twice now he wants to write off the debt tells you he wants to write off the debt, but he can't legally, and therefore the frozen account is a solution, because what it does is it separates the debt from the sale. So it allows Chelsea to complete a sale because the debt has been acknowledged and dealt with, and the Boehly Clearlake Group will have to make that payment, whereas if they didn't go through the government and they took the debt on at book value, they would have to plan in their financials for paying that debt back, but they may not actually have to make an outlay of 1.6 billion, whereas under this scenario, they actually physically have to transfer 1.6 billion to the government, who will hold that money until a point becomes clear when the debt can be resolved. And then when that point becomes clear, at that stage, Abramovich in all likelihood will just write off the debt. So the Boehly Clearlake Group can now presume that even though on their books they won't, and even though they have to find that money to pay to the government, they can have confidence in the long term that this is in essence a debt-free purchase.
Oh, just cut out. Oh, it's a shame. Let's see. Yeah. You know, you're getting away from London now. Maybe, potentially. Oh, there you are. You're back. Yeah, you're back. You're back.
So yeah, I don't know how much you heard of that. Apologies. We're leaving London through all of the tunnels for those familiar with King's Cross and Pancras. So
yeah,
I think that if you've made out what I've said, then congratulations to you, and if not, I apologise for it.
No, I think we got the gist of it.
In and out all the time, but yeah, I mean, look, in essence, the good.
Yeah, we got. Yeah, I think we got the gist of it, because you did touch on the whole situation in terms of him not being able to actually, relinquish that debt at this current moment, because it's literally impossible to do so. I did want to touch on Ratcliffe, but I'm not gonna play about with your connection issues just anymore, because I feel like as if I'm pushing my luck already as it is. In terms of Ratcliffe, on my own opinion, people, I'm a bit surprised the bid came in this late. It was a little bit strange, obviously, that he didn't follow the full process from the start. He may have had a stronger opportunity in the stance if he had done so. And obviously now you heard today that regardless of all that, he does have to literally sit on the sidelines and hope that maybe the Todd Boehly bid does fall through for him to even have a chance or even getting involved. Puzzling for sure. But because there's also no detail in terms of his group, and there was a report that he wouldn't be running the day-to-day operations himself, it is still quite unclear what his whole, plan and outlay even looks like, because it is so rushed. So if you can, Ben, just before you go, is there any final thoughts on Ratcliffe and why he took so long with this? Is it potentially Rain Group and the reported potential favoritism that they may have with certain bidders that he decided to leave it this late? Was he trying to play it smart, or is any notion as to why that was the case? Because for me, when I take a look at this situation, I just say to myself, a lot of Chelsea fans are quite, a lot of Chelsea fans, quite a few Chelsea fans were excited by the late Ratcliffe bid. There was, of course, no consortium with Ratcliffe as well, which is important to note. So he is at least a self-funded bidder. He seems like as if he's just coming into the process to, just to invest his own money and to be successful, so he says. But I mean, just before I let you go, what were your final thoughts on just his bid in general and why it was so late, etc.? Oh, you're muted. Ooh, might have pushed my luck. Let's see if it's possible. Might not. We might be going through a tunnel, people. Maybe so. Yeah, I think hopefully we can finalize on that Ratcliffe part. I think it'd be sad if we couldn't, because obviously everybody really definitely wants to get clarification on that Ratcliffe bit. But just in case we can't, people, just know that, of course, everything that we've been speaking about mainly has been in relation to Todd Boehly, because he is in that period now where he is the guy to wrap this deal up, and everybody else is kind of sitting on the wayside. And of course, Ratcliffe is involved with Nice. So you know, even if an extra complication, and we've spoken about it in terms of the deadline, an extra complication for Ratcliffe would obviously be his ownership of Nice. They wouldn't be able to compete in the same competition as well in Champions League football. And Nice are obviously doing quite well. So that would be a serious issue as well if he was to even be a contender. And that's probably why you're seeing that he's not even, I mean, not only because he skipped so much of the process, but also because, you know, he's literally owning another football club, which is another issue there. But I'm going to bring back Ben in here. Let's see if we can get just a quick, maybe final opinion on the Ratcliffe bid. Hi, Ben. Can you hear me? No, I may have pushed it there. I don't think we're gonna potentially get final thoughts from Ben there, but I'm gonna give it a little bit longer just to see if he could potentially give us his final thoughts. I do want to get your thoughts, people, in the comments down below. We've tried to cover as much as we could in the frame of time. I wanted to stick mainly on Boehly because, of course, he's the most important. Clear up that Clearlake, pardon the pun, side of the bid as well, because of course everybody is very, very keen to discuss that. And, you know, we've spoken a bit about Abramovich. Hopefully you managed to catch his side of things as well. You've got the statement. I gave you my thoughts on the statement yesterday as well. So that's twice now he's come out and confirmed that. So that's important to note, like was said by Ben. And on top of that as well, you know, mainly now it's just about wrapping up this deal. It's the final day of exclusivity, like you said. But you can still, obviously, there's still many things to sort out on the line after that. This is really just about getting the agreement signed. So I don't think we're going to get Ben back, unfortunately. But we did get a lot of info out of him, and he'll be sure to be. We'll be sure to get him back on the channel at some point in the future, because he is brilliant, and he's been covering this so well, so much detail, and really just sticking to the facts of the matter as well, and not trying to over sensationalize the situation and scare you potentially. So I think obviously links will be down in the description for Ben. Shame he can't plug himself, but please do follow Ben on Twitter, CBS Sports. And obviously, like I said, the link will be in the description. Be sure to follow him. Hopefully he continues to cover Chelsea long after this whole situation. This is how I found him. A lot of Chelsea fans have found him. And for me, obviously, smash up the icons if you can. Let me know what you think in the comments down below of the whole situation. And hopefully we get some good news very, very soon on finalizing this bid even more from Todd Boehly and his consortium. And I hope that has calmed you guys down and brought you leveled out to a place where you can feel okay. We got Ben. Hopefully now we can. Let's see. How you doing, Ben? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm good. Sorry, the train
not a problem.
Causes problems.
No problem. I was just letting them know where to follow you on Twitter, just in case I didn't get you back. But just literally before we wrap up, what were your thoughts on Ratcliffe's late bid and maybe the reason behind he came in quite late? Was that strategic from him to maybe avoid some of the potential, you know, rumors that Rain Group were favoring the Ricketts, etc., and maybe were favoring a certain group, and maybe he didn't feel he was favorite? Was this strategic, or do you feel like they just kind of messed us up by coming in this late?
I think it was opportunism. He'd obviously spoken to Bruce Buck and felt that there was a window of opportunity because of the niggling delays prior to the Boehly Clearlake Group entering the period of exclusivity. But I think he was just late to the process. And fundamentally, if you don't enter the process, what chance do you really have? And it would be bad optics for Chelsea to abandon a very lengthy and complex process through Rain Group only to effectively sell to a rogue bidder. And the all-in price that he's offering, if you include the sale value, the charitable donation, the investment into the football club, it's actually slightly lower than Boehly Clearlake. So you've actually got a bidder who, according to has been told he's been rejected out of hand. There was a slight conflict between what Ratcliffe said and what the Ineos PR team said, but fundamentally he enters the process late, he bids less than the preferred bidder, and he doesn't have a formulated pitch, and he's not gone through Rain. So then to ask for consideration at the last minute when Chelsea need a fast sale was always going to add up to a recipe for disaster from his point of view in terms of winning anyway. But from Chelsea's point of view, it gives them leverage, it gives them a backup. And if anything does fall through, they've got another person who has made it clear that he's got the financial means to buy a football club. And maybe that's what it's about for Ratcliffe as a boyhood Manchester United fan. perhaps he wants to make it clear that he wants Chelsea, but if Chelsea's not to be, he's in the market to buy another football club along with Nice. And he has the financial means and capital to do that quickly because he can effectively find the sale value just by extending credit lines.
Oh, audio might have cut out. We're getting there.
Very quickly, but it
There we
doesn't
are.
allow him to.
Yeah, we can hear you again. Yeah. Oh, maybe I spoke too soon. Let's see. I think you may have cut out. Yeah, I think you might have cut out again. I mean, I can still obviously see in the studio backstage, but we got you.
More opportunist.
Nah. There we are. Yeah,
So,
we can hear you now. Perfect. No problem.
The Ratcliffe bid, I think, was always rogue. I don't think he ever thought he was a serious contender. I think that he knew that the Boehly Clearlake bid would enter into this period of exclusivity, and as we're going to see, was the strong favourite to complete a deal. But he's there in the background. He's there making a noise. He's there engaging with people. He's there making it clear he's got the financial means to buy a football club. And I think Chelsea are quite happy to let that run its course because it gives them leverage to make sure that Boehly Clearlake completes the deal on time, knowing that, in theory, there's a new suitor with the financial means that's come into the race. But make no mistake, Ratcliffe isn't the backup, Broughton is the backup, then Paluca is probably the backup, then Ratcliffe is the backup. So he's very much fourth in, at the moment, what is a one-horse exclusive race.
Yeah.
So the odds of him succeeding are minimal. You would have to have a series of disasters from Chelsea's point of view where Boehly clearly somehow doesn't complete the deal, then Broughton is no longer interested, then Paluca walks away, and then if Ratcliffe comes into the race at that point, he probably still wouldn't have time to complete a deal before May the 31st. So it's all very well him saying publicly.
Hopefully
this vocal and this public, especially at this stage of the process, it's usually a sign that they're not a serious
contender.
Contender, and all of the noise is more about gamesmanship and PR than it is about being seriously invested in the process, because the more serious you get, the more silent you get.
100%. And I won't keep you any longer, but that's a fantastic point to make. It's a point that we kind of seen with Nick Candy and his consortium when they were back in the bid. A lot of noise, a lot of talking, a lot of press, a lot of social media presence, but for me it didn't feel like a serious bid. And I agree with you. I think the more silent you are, and Todd has been quite silent throughout this process and leads this process, the more serious you are, especially the later you get on. And it was a bit maybe naive to think that they could come in at this late stage and overhaul which has been a very long process with a lot of safeguards and a lot of different meetings taking place that are very important and for the long-term stewardship of the club. So to come in at this late stage and really, like we said, still no detail on who's running day to day, if it's not going to be himself and all of these things, will they just keep Marina Buck? It's a lot to unpiece there. But listen, Ben, it's been an absolute pleasure. Be sure to have another one of these discussions again in the future. It's been an absolute honor having you on. And listen, I appreciate you coming on even whilst you're traveling, man. I appreciate it. I can hear you now. Perfect.
Yeah, no, I think we can make it work. And next time we'll do it with strong reception and on camera.
Perfect. Well, listen, I'll let you go, and thank you so much, and I hope you continue to cover the club in this much detail throughout, if possible, because it's been an absolute pleasure having you on for such a very confusing time. Guys, listen, like I said, make sure that you're following Ben on Twitter. The link will be down in description. And for me, make sure you obviously smash up the icons. Let me know in the comments down below what you make of the whole situation. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. It's been very important for us to get this in, I think, because we've got a lot of information and a lot of clarity on a lot of confusion. So big up to everybody listening and watching, and I'll see you guys for the next show and the next upload. Big up your damn selves. In a bit, people. Peace.